Okay, here's the hard part.
Oh, well, we'll make it soft.
Yeah, this is the hardest part here. I just need you to say your name and spell it for me.
All right.
Okay? Anytime you're ready.
My name is Sister Mary Esther Flanagan, and it's spelled Flanagan.
Okay. Is that my phone?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can hear it. I can't hear it over the mic necessarily. I'm hearing it out of this other ear. Okay. All right, first things first. And I've got to remember some of her sister's stories so we can get her to tell some of the same stories. But tell me a little bit about you as a girl growing up. Where you lived, what kind of girl you were, tomboy or girly girl.
Very good.
You know.
I was born in Dublin, Ireland, of Thomas and Esther Flanagan, and I'm the second eldest of 10 children. And I was born in 1933, and when I got to be of age where I could use my reason, I can tell you a few things about my childhood. I believe that I was my mother's first girl. She was very proud of me, and she herself was quite healthy while she was pregnant with me. In those days, they walked everywhere, so she had a 4-mile walk to go to our hospital when she knew it was her time. And there was a lovely lady at her doorway when she was passing by this house, and this lady said, "I know where you're going, and I want to give you something." So she gave her a basket of strawberries, and she said, "Yours is going to be a strawberry blonde." Now, my father and mother were black-haired, and it was a laugh from my mother. However, when I was finally out on my own, sure enough, I had platinum blonde hair. And that was the laugh and the joke of the family for all the days I was in my cradle when they were looking at that. My father had a few questions to ask her, but it was okay. Some of his family had been born with blonde hair, so they figured out everything was all right.
Sister Esther, you are a hoot.
My grandfather and my uncle lived in our house when I was born, and it gave me a very good chance of being bonded with more than my father and mother. It was a very healthy, funny time because these two men were home early from work, and it gave my mother plenty of time to rebond with my brother, who was very jealous of me at that time and was always in her way when I was picked up. But the two men took over me in the evening, and I bonded with them almost more than my father and mother. When I was 3 weeks old, my father came down with rheumatic fever that left him in bed for 1.5 years. And guess who took care of the baby? My mother went back to nursing, which she was, and he had to stay in bed for 1.5 years. So I was his playmate during that time with everything that he took care of. I wondered why, when I was about 24, why I favored my father much more than my mother, and I was told at that time that the time for being bonded to both didn't kind of work, and so that's where it came to. The rest of my family were very conscious of the fact that I was his favorite, and as a result, I got many privileges. Yeah, coming along now to my school time, I was brought to the Dominican convent in our neighborhood, and I started in kindergarten just like you would here, only it wasn't called kindergarten, it was called high babies. And so when we got that point, my mother said to me one time, "Be good to the nuns." And I thought, no other way, because that was a slap time for being corrected on things. So I wondered why she said that, but I found out that she didn't like nuns. And she was always watching out for us. However, I got along very well with the sisters, and I loved the school where I was, and I loved the convent that they brought us up to see their things that they received from missionary countries where their people had gone out. And the most beautiful things in their glass cases were on display for us to show what the children in Africa and China and all those would make to send back to the sisters. Unfortunately, I was only in 3rd grade when I had to leave. We were poor at the time, and I think everybody was poor around that time. But when the war broke out, our government told all of us that from now on they would be providing our lunches for us in school. Now the sisters couldn't do that because they weren't state recognized, and so we had to be brought back to the public school. And it was really good for the simple reason that you were given a lunch to bring home at 12, and you didn't come back to your school until 1:30, and as a result you had to stay till 4. And that was for the poor people who hadn't got much heat in their houses, so that you could be at least warm that time in the school. Going on from there, I made my first communion with the Dominicans before I left, and my mother was thrilled with them in the way that they trained us, and we received communion in their chapel and had breakfast and everything else with them in that sense, that they were tremendously good to us, and that's all I ever knew. I found out later on that my grandmother had taught in that school, and she hadn't been treated too well financially as a teacher, and I think that was what my mother didn't like about nuns. Moving on from there, I finished in the public school and got my honors and all of that. And when I was about 12, I began to take on an awful lot of my mother's duties, because there were always 2 or 3 babies on the floor, and when I came home from school it was my job to take them out in their perambulators and meet other girls my age and take care of them until about 6 o'clock, when she had a chance to do all the things she couldn't do in the morning with the babies. But I loved it because it was a neighborhood thing to do. That age, you were a babysitter. When I was 13, I went down to an aunt of mine who owned a hotel, and at the beginning of summer, my mother said, "You can pack up, she's going to take you for the summer." So I went down there, and I became far more mature down there than I could have ever believed, because this aunt of mine had twins, and they were like about 6 months old. And besides taking care of those, I did a little bit of waitering and dishwashing and that kind of thing. But she always managed to give me time to go down to her beach, who was right on the coast, and take a few swims with people in my own age. And I really thought that I was about 19 at that time. It looked like tremendously responsible for everything. And that was some of my very best years of my life. a strike came up for the school at that time. The teachers were on strike for a year, and I was able to go in her county to school at that time. So she kept me down there to go to school. I never missed anything. And at the same time to work with her and take care of the children and sleep there. And so I was about a year and a half with her. I got home every weekend to my mother and was paid by her, which I thought was enormous and the greatest thing in the world, because all of it went to my mother and I never had to worry about the money that I would get for tips from waiting on the things. About 14 years of age, I saw, when I would come home on the weekend, I saw girls that I loved in my own neighborhood, and they were all talking about different places to go. They were either going to go to a place where there's a better school in another county and live with aunts and things like that, or they were simply going to work at 14 years of age, which was very natural again. My mother told me not to even think about going to work at 14, that she had plenty to do for me. So that's where that went. My father was a lamplighter, and we had a huge, huge park that had belonged to the English when we were under their rule. And it was for housing all of the high monks of the government in that time. So that it was beautifully laid out. And there were several kinds of people. The surveyor was in there, and the part of the army was in there, and all of the government people had places in there. And it was a very intriguing thing to me, because everywhere they had their estate, they were cut off by a moat, that they had a wall up, and the water was filled at the bottom, so you could never get into their places. But we had a great time for swimming in there, but they never knew that when we went out. And my father had to do all of the lamps in that estate. It's probably 7 square miles one way and 8 square miles the other. That's the size of the park. So when we got to, especially in the autumn of the year, we would go round with him on his bicycle sometimes if we had the chance to, and he showed us the inside of all of these domains. By now we were we were a republic, and we had changed all of the domains into other people. We had the papal nuncio, we had the American ambassador, and we had the president of our own country, all in these beautiful places. So I had the privilege of seeing what the change was, and he had pictures of the other places when it was under English rule. He was the third in my family to do the lamp lighting. My great-grandfather did it, his father and my father. And he was considered a very honorable man in the sense that he always worked alone, and he had plenty of friends. And he often told us about the Americans who came over to the American legation, and he saw several very famous people come in. Rickenbacker was one of them. He did a flyover or something, I don't know. But even the film stars came in, and he didn't have a camera of his own or anything. But we'd go to my grandmother's and listen to them singing. We didn't have a radio either. But it was quite a thing to be part of that park in our lives. Plus the fact it was a great place for playing, for kids to go. Anyway, at 14 years of age, I saw a lot of mine going here and there, but I noticed some of my best friends were going to convents, and some of them did enter into the convents of my own city, my own country, but others went to England and France and Scotland and Germany and out to Africa and over to America. And it seemed like to me that it was almost done in a year. Like it was finished. They were finished coming and going at that time. But the families of each of these girls that left would come into our house. My mother was a nurse, and they'd want to know what was wrong with them before they go to the doctor and things. And they'd talk to my mother about their children gone. And I said to myself one time, I wonder what they could ever have done for this. Well, one of the mothers said to me, you know, my girl was very impressed with the missionaries who came to your schools, which they did do all the time. Sisters and priests would come to our schools and tell us they came from Biafra. They'd have pictures of the children that were the nuns would be teaching over there. And I said to myself, that's why they already came. They wanted to make sure that we knew about nuns. And I didn't realize it myself, but if I was in my room, for instance, and I saw a towel or something, I'd put it around my face and look and see what I'd like to be a nun or how I would be dressed up. That was my first inkling. But there was a time, again, when I went to this aunt of mine where the twins were, and they were having a retreat or a mission in the parish where she was, and the rectory for the priests was full, and this man, this priest, came down to our hotel to stay with us for the time that he was giving the retreat. And it was my turn to make sure that his bed was turned down and that his cup of tea before he went to bed was ready for him when he'd come in from church. And I noticed that he was sick maybe the second day, and I told my aunt, and she went up and he said, I'm getting over pneumonia, but I'll be all right. But again, he was very, very talkative, and when I would look in to see if he was there, first of all, and see if he wanted anything, he would just sit me down and talk. And he was actually a Vincentian from a very, very close place to me where I was at home. But I was infatuated with the idea that he could be that brave with his squeezing and everything else to go in and do the mission. And he did not sound like he was sick when he talked, because I asked my aunt to go over one evening just to hear him. And something there was what caught me about saying, should you be a nun? Little did I know that priest also knew my father, and he was telling my father about your girl, very interested in going to the convent. So he didn't say anything to my mother. And yes, I finally did say to my brother, who was going into the seminary the same year, I said, I think I'm going to be going off somewhere soon enough. Oh, he said, you couldn't do anything like that. You're only 14. Oh, I said, I don't mean go now, but I mean I will be going. But that's where we had to start thinking. He didn't say a word. They were scraping up everything they could get for him in expenses to go to the seminary. It was actually a monastery that he was going to, because it was an order that he wanted to go to, but they would send him out to a seminary. Now, when he got finished with his thinking about me, he went off to the seminary. He had to go in June in those days for an orientation and that kind of thing. And sure enough, I got a call from somewhere downtown in my own city, and it was a sister who called. And I didn't have a telephone. Our shop over across the way had the phone, and had to run over there and talk to her on the phone. And I loved her American accent because you could hear that on the films, you see. And sure enough, she said to me, I'm from Florida. And I had to say, where is Florida? The sisters that I was speaking to from Florida was off the phone very quick. She just wanted my name and my address. And I felt a little bit leery because I knew I had to say something to my mother now. And she was quite calm about it. And she didn't say when, where, or anything else because she was like myself. I was 14, and, I knew very well nobody would want me at that time, and I didn't feel like going away from home at that time. Mm-hmm. However, there was another gentleman that came to my house who was my brother's mentor. He'd already found his mentor in the seminary where he was, or the monastery, and Frank, my brother, had told him about it. Well, this man lived in Dublin. He didn't live in the next county where my brother went to. And he met these sisters. So he came up to the house one day, introducing himself to my mother as Frank's mentor. And of course, she was delighted. Tell me all about him. What is he doing? And the rest. And when he sat down, he said, you have a daughter? Oh, she said, I have 5 daughters. I mean, the oldest one. Yes. Well, I wanted to talk to you about the sisters down in King Street. We had what they called a hostel. It was like a hotel just to bring in missionaries and sisters. I wanted to say doctors. Priests and sisters went to this place, and they were brought in for nothing, no pay or anything. It was another community of sisters that was running the hotel. And so my future sisters were living there for a year. Bishop Hurley had sent them over to recruit sisters for them. They got quite a few at that time, too. He said that he would be glad to take me in his car to go down and talk to them. And I said to my mother, you're coming with me? And she said yes. So we went down. He disappeared and went off for a while. And these 2 sisters I thought were magnificent. One was from Philadelphia, and I loved her accent. The other one was home on vacation. She was from Cork. And both of them looked so beautiful. I couldn't believe, because we didn't see that habit over in our place. And it was light veils and all. And you know how teenagers can admire any kind of dress, but that's where I was. So my mother sent me out for about 20 minutes to look around the garden while she had private talk with these people. And in that conversation, I found out later that these 2 sisters said, oh, don't worry about the age, because we have an academy and she can finish her high school there. And so my mother was quite delighted. However, 2 weeks went, and we heard from the sisters again. And they said, we found a place in Ireland where there is a missionary school, and we want to know if you'd like to go there boarding for a year. And those sisters will give you a pretty good insight as to whether you really want to become a sister in a foreign land like you're doing. Well, if there was anything that the Sisters of St. Joseph really did for me as a basic for discerning my vocation, it was going there. They were Mercy Sisters. There were about 95 girls, anything from my age to 22, in this, only for people who were going on foreign missions. And it was the most appealing thing because each one of us had the same feelings about everything. And the sisters there were all ready to give us every practice we could take in to know whether we would like to go to the convent or not. So you could stay there for as long as the order was ready to take you. Well, I think my mother gave me tremendous advancement or opportunities to be a very mature person at that age, because I had always done everything for her. I probably never noticed it, but all the girls of my age could sew, could darn, could use a sewing machine, could bake, could settle babies for everything that they needed to have done. And that was something that you were proud of because you were next to your mother, and she really thought that that was the thing to do. Now, when that happened, my mistress and novices, when I came, oh yes, I came by boat. We had no idea of planes at that time for traveling like that, and we had a 5-day cruise from Dublin to New York, and I went with 4 other girls, and they were all much older than I. They were working girls, like 20 and 21, and there was only one that was 17 nearer to me, but she stuck with the others. But after a while on the boat, we got to know each other so well because, again, they took me as a mature person. I was 5'5" at that time and very well developed, and so I didn't look like a little tranine of a girl. I got a letter once a month from Sister Ambrose, the one I met in Ireland, and there was always a care package for me in that, which we shared with the girls in the school. There was continued interest in looking at people who came to see them and where they were going. And I said, oh God, aren't I the luckiest thing in the world that I'm going to a land of sunshine and flowers? And this is what Ambrose would say to me, it's a land of sunshine and flowers. And then she'd show me pictures of the palm trees and the whole bit. And so I said, you're sending me to that. Imagine I'll never have a heavy winter, which of course was very prevalent in Ireland. And I would dream and dream about this thing while I was in this missionary school. I found out that 2 others in the school were going to the very same sisters that I was going to. And that was even better because we dreamed and dreamed on a little bit more every day about it. Anyway, at the end of my first year, Ambrose got a report from our sisters telling them that I was certainly fit for. Now, it was like in between 15 and 16 at that time that I was going. My birthday is in June, and I was going in August. I was going to be 16 at that time. And when I started thinking about that and coming home from my holidays and knowing that I had till August, it was a great time for letting go and putting on and getting ready for travel and the whole bit. My father was the one who took me to the train station that was to bring me to the coast where I was to get my boat. And he did real well with the other 3 girls that were with me, 4 girls that were with me. We all jumped onto the same train. And he said, now, you know, I've got to work. I won't be going down there with you. And I knew that already. And the other 3 girls were going to wait until their fathers came home from work. We were leaving at about 7 o'clock in the morning. And when they came they said they're going to go on another train and they're going to be there for us in about an hour after we get there. So that was a great feeling that we weren't just left alone. But we got on the boat at about 9 o'clock that night, and they had dinner ready for us and the whole bit. And it was the most exciting thing that I'd ever done in my life before. It was an old World War II boat transformed into a cruise boat. And it was the height of luxury, and it was the height of good society, and it was the height of shopping and drama and theatrics and anything that you'd ever think you were in one of the best movie houses in the world. So we all had 5 days of the most wonderful, wonderful travel. And we got to New York, and our sisters met us again. And they brought us into a hotel for the night. And we were surprised because they brought our clothing with them that we would wear on the way home in the train, and we didn't know that. So we laughed and cried at the idea that we weren't seculars anymore. But that was to save tax, that they would recognize us as religious and we wouldn't have to pay tax. But we didn't know that either until years later. Sister Ambrose had relatives in New York, and we went to see them, and we got a cruise and a travel. We were not half appreciative enough of what they were showing us because we couldn't take in the importance of things. And the station in New York that we got into was, what's the main station there that I've forgotten already? in New York. Well,
is that Grand Central?
Grand Central. We kind of just didn't even pay attention to it until later, of course, when we started reading about it. That's where we were, and we didn't even know. But this is where it was. And then the sisters here, I don't know how I could have ever come into a better group of people. At that time, we had about 27 people in the novitiate in their training. So I was absolutely socialized within a week with these people. And we had a pool, of course, and it was hot in August. And that was a great thing to do in the evening when the boarders weren't in yet for school. And I said, never would anyone have believed that I went to a mission country like this, having all the luxury of my life, when we had heard of the missionaries who came to talk to us from other places that had to learn a language, and they had to have their mothers send them over their clothes all the time. And so I started thinking what I was going to write to my mother when I tried to get 2 pieces of paper you were given to write, and tried to tell her exactly what the place was like. But I managed again to put it there. The thing that I had forgotten about completely was that I didn't see yet the boarding school that I was going to be finishing my graduation in. And as a result, I was in the convent. And I was told later that she nearly died when I was in the convent at 16. Oh, she'll be back in a month, was what she was saying. She'll be back in a month. So that never happened, of course, as you know. And when things got, in other words, the postulancy where they're looking at you and you're looking at them and seeing if you're one they want, and if you wanted to, fine. We got through that very nicely, the postulancy, and we had no trouble being accepted as sister, novice, and just, it was such the speed of the way that Americans go to work and go to do everything was killing us with the heat of the summer and the heat of Florida as well. But we asked our misters and novices if we could do some exercises when we were down at the pool, because in this nice long habit you went on Chinese steps as well to keep your dignity and your poise and your everything. So that's what we did. We went down to the pool and we exercised in the pool, and finally we got to the point where we were able to run with the crowd and stay attuned to it. That was one of the biggest obstacles we had, because the mind didn't go with the legs sometimes, and we were not finished on time. The formation in the novitiate was very, very like what I got in the missionary school, and I had no trouble whatsoever going through any adjustments or having to transform. I was a little nun coming into another group of nuns, and they saw it. And my mistress and novices never thought of me as 16, 18 or 19 is what and she gave me jobs to do that you wouldn't give to a 14 or 15 or 16-year-old person. But that was my greatest delight, was the fact that she thought she could depend on me for things, and that I could even miss classes sometimes to do things for her. We finally came around to where it was time now to start going to college. But I didn't tell you that I did go to school in my time, the very beginning of my time in the convent. We didn't realize that all of the sisters in the academy were master's degree people. And what they did was they sent those sisters over for us, and they gave us a test that showed what our college education would be. And yes, we were all first-class college people, according to what we learned at home. And they had no trouble at all just giving us something like American geography and American history and a few other things that they knew we wouldn't have gotten over there. The sisters in that Mercy convent had been nearly all over the world, so that when I learned about Florida, they said, "Oh, the language for you will have to be Spanish and French. One side to the east, it's French, it's New Orleans, and down south, it's Cuba." So, and sure enough, it was the greatest blessing in the world, because by the time Castro came and all that, I was well into the Spanish. So the beautiful things that I have received from the Sisters of St. Joseph is unmentionable, indescribable. And I think maybe that's all I want to say.
We need to know about what your ministries have been. How have you served?
Yeah.
Yes, it was time now to go out for ministry. And it didn't matter how old you were or how young you were. On your first year going out, you did get a class. And you did get a mentor. And you had a good principal. And they watched out for you day and night for every single thing that you did. In the meantime, on Saturdays, we always had a sister from the academy who gave us the practicum of what the next thing would be for you for that week. And that's how we crawled into the teaching profession. My place was Miami. in a beautiful school, St. Mary's, and I had 57 children to teach. And I was delighted with it because the parents of those days made sure that they were paying, when they were paying tuition, that we had to give them the worth of it. And so they cooperated fully with us in what the children should do. They were well behaved, they were smart, and the flying colors of the grades in front of me coming out with these things absolutely surprised me to no end that kids could learn like that. And I still had myself at home to do far more work because, again, being a slow person coming from Ireland, I never got finished my work, whereas I could see the American sisters giving their things to the kids to do, you know, put this in file for me here and do that there for me. And I didn't learn how to do anything for the children because I was so conscious of making sure that they could do what they were asked to do. That didn't last for very long because the next year it was only half that, and the next year was it. So at 20 or 21, I was a professional teacher in my own mind. In this time now, we were going to college as well, at Barry College, twice a week, and after school we went down and we started on the things that they had to kind of evaluate me too, because they had seen my credits from what the sisters found in me. And they were saying, well, we could start you on second year college. Well, I said, I don't want to miss it because I'm an American and I have to learn what Americans do. Mine was the English system of education at home. And so it was all memorizing and that kind of thing. And I laid that very much on the kids, and this is what I remembered later, 40 years later, when I'd see a student coming to me and said, if you hadn't helped me to remember things, I would have known nothing. But these were the beautiful things of that. I was only 16 years teaching when I became a principal, and by that time I had a bachelor's degree. We didn't go too well for colleges, for a year or two to get things. We went in the afternoons, and we were always sent to counties around where they would have a college for us to go to. So after 6 years, I got my degree, and that was a big, big, beautiful thing, because none of my family had gone to college, and it was such a pride for my mother and father. The reason that I was 16 years teaching was that I hadn't had a chance to get a master's yet. And so as soon as I got my bachelor's degree, I was sent for the master's on the same basis. Every month of the year I was going to college out of school. But it was very much worth it, because the older you get, the faster you can learn, it seems to me, when you have to. The principal there, as principal there, I was given every single possible thing from the college that could be my supervisory needs for the children. I was 13 years a principal, and at that point I was getting into my 40s, and a new general that we got for our governance was a medical woman at Mercy Hospital, and the very first thing that she said that we had to do was to get acquainted with the doctor, which we never had at that time. We just went to any old doctor. And of course, we didn't go to doctors when you were young. There was no reason for it. And so what she was aiming for was to watch out for sisters who were coming into the age of change and who had to be allowed to give up teaching by 45 to get away from kindergarten kids and all of that, so that they could be healthier at that time and get themselves in for a change of life. And so it was around that time that I was asked, would I like to leave teaching? And I did. And I went then for another master's degree in theology and the Christian, sorry, I've lost the word, with Christian spirituality. Because I had said at this time I was altogether too long doing the secular things for kids and everything, and that I would like to get interiorized myself in my vocation, in my relationship with God, and possibly giving adult education in the spirituality things. And that took about 5 summers to get before I could do it. But I was put into parish work at that time, and it was the most rewarding thing I could have ever had, because it was my first time being away from kids and being with adults, and I didn't know myself. Boy, so beautiful. I was 18 years in that job, and I shouldn't say job, ministry is our word. And it was the time that RCIA broke out and Bible study came in, and I had been very well equipped in my theology and my spiritual degree masters to do that. So I did retreats and spiritual direction, all of that, when I got finished. I was 18 years there, and I was going on my 66th year at that time, and I knew very well that with having boards and everything else in school, that the pastor wasn't in full charge of everything, that the board had things to say. And being a worker with lay people too, they understood that 65 was the common age for everybody to. So I saw that very quickly, and I told the pastor 2 years before I resigned from there that I would be resigning when I was 67 or 68, something like that. And I was quite healthy and quite well able to do at that time. And he kept saying to me, but you're able to do everything. I can't let you go. I said, no, I have lay people who are going to be, again, taken off the rod at 65. I really believe that I shouldn't be any different than them. So it happened, and that's where I went. And while I was telling Eileen, I lived in Lake City and she lived in Jacksonville, that I was going to do that. I had already gotten it okay with my governance. And they said, well, you're in the time of post-Vatican II. You have a choice of finding a job for yourself, finding a ministry, and if you know what you want and we approve, you can have it. So one Sunday on my day off, after being in the parish till Tuesday, that was my time out, I went over to Eileen and said to her, well, at the end of this year, I'm going to be, it was January, at the end of this year, I will be leaving here, and I don't know where I'm going. Oh, she said, I have it ready for you. I said, you're joking. How did you know? She said, you told me before, but you forgot. So that's fine. I said, now, are you going to have to are you all right?
Sister, I know you want to get to Mass. I just want to make sure that you're sensitive to the time.
Yeah, well, I could take 2 minutes then.
Okay. You're going to talk about Divine Mercy House, right?
That's all.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure you don't
Yeah,
miss. Okay.
you know about Divine Mercy.
I know you.
So she showed me the bulletin, and they wanted to have a person who would be a house mother for this new little home that they had for teenage pregnancies and young single girls. And of course, there's nothing I would love to have more, because I came from a family like I did, and I had a lot of still the ideas of what to do. So she immediately called the person that was supposed to see me, and she came over immediately, and she said, "You have it." Well, I said, "I won't have it till about October." No, she said, "We won't be ready by that time either, November maybe." So sure enough, I went to my pastor and told him it definitely was that I had to get out, that I had a job, and that. So I spent 3 years with Divine Mercy, probably the most profitable, fruitful, and enjoyable years that I could possibly have had. The setup there was that it was a 3-year program, and it was a very, very private, special place where we lived. And the girls were never allowed to see the father of the child until it was born, and that they had no way of getting out of this place except when we took them to places. And that had to be changed because the mothers were going crazy, not knowing where their kids were. And within 3 weeks after I got there and we were established, yes, the mothers were able to come see them. And of course, a lot of them were street kids, and they, I could only take 3 at a time. And that was plenty because it was a small house. But the rules and regulations that were laid down for these kids was absolutely beautiful. They were so glad to come in to Dr. Prince's place. They were living on his property at the time, and there wasn't a day that he passed by our house that he didn't come in and take hello to the girls. And so we had to close that up when the lady Dr. Prince's mother got sick, and she had to come up to her own house, is what we lived in. But she didn't do that. She lived with her other daughter that was in Jacksonville and left the house with us. But we were told that within a year, and it was the end of the 3rd year, that she was going to have to come back to her house. And so that's where I was. I spent a few convents for a while, going out to parishes, giving retreats. They didn't know, that I didn't have a job. But I found a doctor in Jacksonville, and I got myself examined after being about 2 years away from a doctor. And unfortunately, my heart was going down, carotid arteries were gone, and I had to take time out for that. And when I did, I asked to retire at that time until I would get better again. And Sister Ann Kuhn was my superior at the time, and she said, "No problem, you're 71, you'll be okay." And she gave me my room, and I had somebody bring a truck over and bring my stuff with the kids and all. And when that happened, it was great for the simple reason that I thought I was going into a retirement home and that there were lovely little things to do there. So after Anne spoke to me and got me settled, I was okay. But over the night time, I went to her and said, all of a sudden I've remembered that I will not be able to do that transition that you were talking about. I'll need something to do over there. She said, "We already changed it for you. You'll be the administrator there now," she says, in Lourdes community. So that's what I was for 3 years. And again, the doctor said, no, you have to go down further in not having the responsibilities and not having the runarounds and all. It's not good for the... So I resigned at that time for good at 74 years of age, finished. But there is only one thing that I can say to you about this idea of being a sister of St. Joseph. And it is that in the times that I was at Creighton and taught by the Jesuits, they were the ones that brought me into a relationship with Christ that I could never have dreamed of. And there is that idea that when you get out of the secular work and you can come into an atmosphere like the Lourdes community, you fully realize what it is to be a contemplative, because the time is there and the need for praying for others is there, and the fact that we have the Blessed Sacrament right at our toes when we go in there has made a huge difference in my interior life. And I don't know how anybody could have ever believed that there could be such a paradise here on earth for that.